Hello, those of you who have logged on. We're just going to wait a total of 1 minute to start the session, just to let everybody hop on. Okay, I've been informed it's been 1 minute. So it's 2:16 and we're going to get started on this presentation and session. Hello, everybody. I can't see you, but I know you're out there. Welcome to the 2022 Mass Trails Conference virtual kickoff. Technically, this is not the first session that we had for this conference so far. There was a chainsaw safety workshop last weekend, which was held over the 2 days of the weekend, and I'm pleased to report that it was a great workshop that was well attended, and man, did they have beautiful weather. So it was a good start to the conference, and now we're going to move on to today's session. And today we are very, very pleased to have with us an impressive team of advocates and experts who will be presenting on trails for all ages and abilities, which will begin at 2:30. But first, our team would like to take a moment to introduce ourselves and provide a bit of background on what Mass Trails is, what it does, how it does it, along with a quick guide to the conference and what we have in store for the rest of the week. But first, we're going to cover some housekeeping. So next slide, please. All right, just your regular housekeeping notations. One is that this webinar will be recorded. Currently is being recorded, and we hope to post it after the conference on our website. If you have questions during the presentation, please type it into the Q&A box. We are not using the chat box for questions, and that's actually been disabled for this presentation, this webinar. But if you have a question, please use the Q&A. And if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please contact ERG at meetings@erg.com, and they'll try to troubleshoot the issue. ERG, Eastern Research Group, is our event consultant for the Mass Trails Conference. So we're pleased to have them on board helping us out with this webinar as well as the rest of the conference. Okay, next slide, please. Oop, that is not the correct slide. So let's go back up again. Is there one after that? Here we go. Okay, so we'll begin by introducing our Mass Trails team, starting with myself. My name is Amanda Lewis, and I'm the Mass Trails Program Manager, working out of the Department of Conservation and Recreation. My job is to work with Trails team, the Massachusetts Recreational Trail Advisory Board, and the public to identify and implement strategies aimed at improving and enhancing our trails across Massachusetts. I started out at DCR about 15 years ago, trudging through the woods, collecting GPS data for the DCR Road and Trail Inventory. And in 2008, I snagged a job running the Recreational Trails Program out of DCR, which is a federal funding program for trails. Back in 2017, I was asked to develop and manage what is now the Mass Trails Program, and have been working to create and continuously build up that program ever since. A few years ago, I was very, very lucky to have a new member of our team join us, and I'm going to hand it over to Libby Knott to talk a little bit about herself and what she does.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. One of the most favorite things in my life is talking about myself. So here I go. I joined the Mass Trails team in 2019. I came over from the DCR operations team. I had been managing the Esplanade, which was a fantastic job, but it was time to do something different and use my master's in landscape architecture to a little bit more use. And what I do is I help Amanda with all the initiatives that are involved with the Mass Trails Management. But most folks familiar with the program know me as the person that pesters them for those really mundane forms to get your contract going, the EFT, the W-9, that's me. You'll hear from me by email or phone call if you're missing something. But my favorite aspect about my job is I'm the money gal. So when you need your money and you file for reimbursement, I help you get that money to you. And we like you to spend as many pennies as possible. So I work really closely with the grantees to do just that. Other things I do a lot of the marketing and communications, the visuals and the graphics for anything the team needs. I help Amanda with program development and the annual review every year. It's a big task and there's a lot of moving parts. So Amanda and I tackle that. And we're welcoming a new person this year to help manage that as well. And we'll talk about Eli in just a moment. But in all, there's just so much to do and so much to tell you about. I would bore you to tears. But one of the biggest things I've been doing for the last 6 months is this, planning the conference. And we're so welcome to have you here today. And we hope that you'll be joining us in the coming days too, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And I'm going to talk about those opportunities in just a moment.
Thank you, Libby. Can we go back to that slide that we saw a minute ago? That one, there we are. So we didn't want to be remiss and not recognize the third member of our team, who, some of you folks that are online will have already interacted with him. He's been on board since July, and his name is Elijah Fry, and he's our Mass Trails planner. Fortunately for him, and unfortunately for us, he got married a week and a half ago and is currently on his honeymoon in Hawaii. So he's unable to to join us today, but he actually is going to get off the plane on Saturday and drive to the conference so that he can have some person-to-person time at the Mass Trails Conference and meet some of you folks who plan on attending the plenary session that day. He's been an incredible asset to our program since he started, especially with picking up all the odds and ends of getting this conference together, and also helping us run the grant program while we were doing all of the conference planning as well. So hi, Eli, hope you're having a really great time in Hawaii, and we can't wait to see you on Saturday. If you're curious, this is a picture of him from his wildlife technician job that he had a few years back somewhere out west, where he was tagging bear cubs for some reason that escapes me at this exact moment. But there he is, and hopefully if you come on Saturday, you can meet him in person. Next slide, please. Okay, so back to Mass Trails. So what is Mass Trails? Mass Trails represents a statewide vision to provide a diversity of trail experiences across the Commonwealth that are equitable, inclusive, and serve a distinct and beneficial purpose to the people of Massachusetts and its visitors. That's a mouthful, but that's that's what Mass Trails really is, down to its core. I don't have to tell most of you this, but trails make communities better places to live by preserving and creating spaces which encourage physical fitness and healthy lifestyles, provide opportunities for outdoor recreation and non-motorized transportation. They strengthen our local economies, they protect our environment, and they preserve our culturally and historically significant places. Mass Trails is working to work internally and externally to help to build out our trail system in Massachusetts, because of all of these reasons and how important trails are. Where did Mass Trails come from? Back in 2017, Governor Charlie Baker's office formed the Interagency Trails Team, which consists of representatives of state agencies who plan, design, and build trails across the state, public trails across the state. Those agencies are the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, Mass DOT, and the Department of Conservation and Recreation. Those are the only 3 agencies in the state that actually build or design or plan public trails. The group started meeting bi-weekly and continues to do so today, with the goal of building out our trail system across the state. We focus particularly on filling critical gaps in the state's network of shared use paths and continuing to improve and expand our networks of recreational trails across the state. So the concept of Mass Trails was born from Trails Team, and our mantra is to our mantra represents the goal of creating one Trails team, one vision, and one action plan to accomplish our goal. How does Mass Trails do this? One way that the Trails team works to build out our trail system is by improving agency coordination, just by meeting every 2 weeks as different agencies. That has been a monumental move for getting trails built in Massachusetts correctly and, you know, with a distinct lens on strategy, on where they need to be built and where the next trail needs to get built. So we improve interagency coordination. We look at policies and programs to support a common vision for trails. Some other examples of how we work internally within the state to build out our trail systems is Trails team will meet with the Department of Environmental Protection, for example, to talk about ways to make permitting more effective and easier to get done while also, you know, complying with the Massachusetts Wetland Act. We also are reaching out to utility corridors and railroad companies to talk about obtaining rights of way to build trails on top of their easements. So if there's lots of different ways that Trails team is working internally to talk to others about how we can get trails built. We also Mass Trails also provides technical guidance and expertise, including targeted outreach, publications, and trainings. The biggest place where the best place where you can find this information and our initiatives is on the Mass Trails website. There's links to everything that we've been working on and everything that is going on with trails in Massachusetts. So some examples of technical guidance include our benefits of shared use path study. And we've recently launched a bike wayfinding design guide that's approved all the way up to FHWA in terms of the kind of signage that we're advocating for within that guide. We do provide trainings. Our most high profile training is the Mass Trails Conference. And that obviously is going on right now. And we work very hard to target our trainings and this conference to cover the needs, the information that people need to hear who are out in the trail community trying to build trails. Finally, we provide funding to municipalities and nonprofits for trail projects across the state. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide, please. The Mass Trails Grants Program. So Mass Trails provides grants to plan, design, construct, and maintain recreational trail and shared use pathway projects across the state. Applications are accepted annually on February 1st of each year, usually. And eligible recipients are municipalities, public entities, and nonprofits. The award maximum depends on project type and needs, but is usually $50,000 for local projects and $500,000 for regional and statewide significant projects. A local project, for example, can be a closed loop trail system on a conservation parcel of land and mainly just used by locals. So we do limit that to $50,000, but projects with a much far-reaching that are much more far-reaching can receive more funds than that. I'm going to move on from this slide, but there's more information about the grant program on the website, and feel free to check that out in the weeks to come. Next slide, please. I don't want to steal the thunder of the Mass Trails Conference, but I do want to announce that the Mass Trails grant application period is actually now open and has been since November 1st. Applications are due Tuesday, February 1st, 2023. And we will be sending out a more formal announcement about this next week. And we ask that if you have questions, now that you know about it, if you can hold off on grant questions until next week when Libby and I have had a vacation day or two and we're ready to get back into that. But so that's all I have to say. I went a little bit over more than I thought I would. So I'm going to hand it over to Libby. Sorry about that. And she's going to talk a little bit about the conference.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. So I'm a little peaked from all the late nights of planning, so I'm actually just going to read, and I apologize for that. But here's a little bit about the Mass Trails Conference. Did you know that this is our 7th conference? We had a few trails workshops way back when, but in 2011, we kicked off our biennial conference in earnest. And we last met in 2019 and should have met again in 2021. But gathering, as you know, has been a little bit difficult for the past couple of years, which is an understatement. But one of the best aspects about trails is that they connect us all through the great outdoors. So this year, our conference is about reestablishing those wonderful connections, dipping our toes back into the in-person conference pool, while also offering additional options for participation. That way, we have something for everyone, no matter if it's in person, on a trail, virtual, or after the fact by watching a digital recording. Our conference will look and feel a bit different this year from years past. Heck, we're kicking it off in the middle of the week virtually. That is new. And we're trying a few other things on for size this year. We spread the conference out over a week, due in part because we have a 2-day chainsaw safety workshop that always seems to coincide with the plenary session, and those folks tend to miss out on those opportunities. So we've broken it up to give people more opportunities to get to the plenary sessions. So what's on tap? Well, you'll find some of the tried and true stuff like wetlands permitting, wayfinding, water management, but you'll find some new exciting stuff too. Like we have the full moon hikes tonight. If you haven't signed up, it might be too late for a couple, but there's still some openings for 1 or 2 of them. We have forest bathing, which is very, very cool and not what it sounds like at all. And we have our first ever trail mixer question and answering period at the end of the day, Saturday. It's kind of not only a networking, but a blow off steam, and let's get to know each other. And let's spend a half hour or so face to face, reconnecting and talking about all things Mass Trails. We have an amazing keynote speaker planned, Alec Griswold. He's the executive director of Elevate Youth in Boston. It's a program that endeavors to empower youth to explore the outdoors alongside mentors. Alec embodies this year's conference theme of building trails, creating community. He saw a need, set out to fill the gap by providing experiences and resulting in a new outdoors community in Boston. He and the team of Elevate Youth Mentors are trying to spark a lifelong love of outdoors through equitable access and routine immersion in nature as a way to foster agency and help support the next generation of diverse environmental stewards. You won't want to miss this program's inspiring story. So if you haven't yet registered or checked out the conference options fully, we encourage you to take another look today by visiting the website. We hope you can all join us on Saturday, and we have some great sessions in store. And again, we look forward to seeing you in person. And with that, let's kick off officially the 2022 Mass Trails Conference. And I'm going to turn it over to Becky Bash of Pioneer Valley Planning Council to do just that. Thank you.
Thanks, Libby. And while I'm waiting for the slides to come up, I'm Becky Bash. I'm a senior planner with the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission in the Pioneer Valley of Western Massachusetts. And my focus is on health and land use. And it's great to be here today for the Mass Trails Conference kickoff discussion. So I believe the slides are coming up in just a minute. I was asked to submit a proposal for this conference by Mike Toomey, who facilitates the Mass State Forest and Parks Friends Network. And because he had recognized that Pioneer Valley Planning Commission was doing work to help communities plan for being age and dementia friendly. But since only a small part of that work involves trails, I reached out to a number of people who are doing the hard work, advocating for trails for all ages and all abilities. So as well as planning, designing, and building those trails. So I'm just gonna wait until the slides come up.
Their slides are, your slides are showing on my screen.
Oh, I can't
And-
see them on my screen. Okay.
Um,
Okay, so I'm not sure which slide we're on, but we should be on the second. Oh, there we go. Okay, second slide now. Okay, so I'm going to give a brief overview of the importance of planning for healthy aging, and then you'll hear presentations from my co-panelists. And those include Meg Bandera. She's a nature lover, landscape painter, and accessible trail advocate. She's the founder of Unpaved Trails for All, and is a director on the board for Friends of Northampton Trails and a member of the Massachusetts Recreational Trail Advisory Board. Next are Peter Flinker, who's a principal at Dodson and Flinker, and Jeffrey Bagg, who is the city planner for the city of East Hampton, and they will present on the recently opened Mount Town Trailhead Park in East Hampton, which is one of the locations of the Full Moon Hikes tonight. And then we have Rebecca Cornell, who's the conservation administrator and planner for the town of South Hadley. And she'll be presenting on the River to Range Trail in South Hadley. And then Andrew Kilduff is the founder and principal at Terra Genesis and was the designer of the Lake Wallace Sensory Trail in Belchertown. Next slide. So we're going to have a poll now to see who's in the room. And so we'll give a little bit of time for each question. There's 3 questions. So the first one, what age are you? Jessica will show results as soon as we have some responses. Okay, so pretty good range. And I like to see 16% over the age of 70, which is great, and a couple over 85. Great. So next question. So do you or a friend or family member have one or more of the following conditions? And you can check all that apply here. Jessica, if you want to show the results. Okay, so quite a range. 52% limited mobility, 13% blindness or low vision, 42% with balance issues, 26% with children, and 29% Alzheimer's or another form of dementia, sensory sensitivity, 10%, and another chronic or invisible condition that impacts mobility at 23%. So as you can see, there's quite a bit. Everyone knows someone or may have these conditions themselves. Okay, so third question. This is an easier one. Does your community have a trail that's accessible for all users? Yes or no? Okay, we can probably show that one. Yes, great, 74% and 26% no. So thanks everyone. It's great to understand who's in the room here. Okay, next slide. So the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission encompasses 43 cities and towns in Hampden and Hampshire counties, and we span both sides of the Connecticut River with the Berkshires to our west and the Quabbin Reservoir to the northeast, and Worcester County to the east. The population of the region is about 620,000, and the largest city is in Springfield, which has a population of about 150,000. We've been working for the last few years on an age and dementia-friendly Pioneer Valley initiative and received funds from the Tufts Health Plan Foundation in 2020 to provide technical assistance to member communities, mainly in the form of engaging older adults to voice what they see as assets or challenges in their communities. We also convene partners quarterly in regional virtual meetings to share best practices and hear from experts on domains of age and dementia-friendly communities. And we'll be applying for designation as an age and dementia-friendly region in the coming months. So the symbols on the map show various stages of age and dementia-friendly designation. The hearts are age-friendly, the stars are dementia-friendly. And again, we're working with all of the towns to make the whole region age and dementia-friendly. The circles show the towns that are represented here today on the panel. Next slide. So we organize this work around the domains of an age and dementia-friendly community with this model that was developed by the Massachusetts Healthy Aging Collaborative. As planners, we generally focus on the built environment, but it's important to note that the social environment, communication, public safety, health and community services are all equally important when planning for healthy aging. One of the domains of the age and dementia-friendly communities are outdoor spaces and buildings, and that includes trails, which are important for enabling people to exercise, but also became doubly important during the pandemic as they became spaces for people to gather and meet with friends and combat social isolation. So it's also important to note that the built and social environment supports older adults and people with disabling conditions. It also benefits the whole community. So trails and sidewalks that are accessible can be used by people pushing strollers, as well as people using wheelchairs or walkers. Next slide. So why plan for an aging population? According to population trends, it's projected that by 2035, the percentage of the population that's over 65 will be greater than the percentage of the population that's under 18. Also, as people live to older ages, the risk of dementia increases. It's estimated that 1 in 3 people over the age of 85 will have some form of dementia in their later years. And all sectors of the community really need to be aware of how to recognize signs of dementia, communicate with people with dementia, and develop a safe and welcoming community for both the built environment and social environment for people with dementia and their care partners. Next slide. These are some charts that show population trends in the PVPC region. The top chart is 2010, the lighter bars are the percentage of population under 18 and the darker bars are over 65. So this just shows, according to American Community Survey estimates, the shift is already happening in many communities, and many have a greater population of people over 65 than children under 18. Next slide. And then this is another chart that shows all of the communities in the Pioneer Valley, including Franklin County to the north. And there's really a range. Almost every community had an increased share of the over 65 population as a share of the total population. And that ranged from 0 to 21%, with an average of the whole Pioneer Valley of about 4% change in that share. Next slide. So although many people continue to lead long and healthy lives, the risk of having a disabling condition such as hearing loss, visual impairment, or mobility limitations increases as we age. So this chart shows age groups in Hampden and Hampshire counties. The blue and red are male and female populations in Hampden County. Green and purple are male and female in Hampshire counties. And it's divided by age group. So as you can see, as people get older, there's a higher percentage of that age group that has a disabling condition, with the over 75 and over population having up to 40 to 50% of the population with some kind of disabling condition. Next slide. The World Health Organization defines healthy aging as a process of developing and maintaining the functional ability that enables well-being in older age. And functional ability is about having the capabilities that enable all people to be and do what they have reason to value. So it includes meeting basic needs, learning, growing, making decisions, being mobile, building and maintaining relationships, and contributing to society and community. Next slide. I thought it was important to include the concepts of intrinsic capacity and functional ability in this discussion because the environment plays a big role in one's opportunities to lead healthy lives. So as people age, they may lose some of their intrinsic capacity or their mental or physical capacities to walk, think, see, hear, and remember. And the level of intrinsic capacity is influenced by the presence of chronic disease, injuries, and age-related changes. So this photo on the right is my mom at age 83. She is smiling because she's recovering from her second knee replacement. She's got some issues with balance and recovering from surgery. So she's using hiking poles to sort of help compensate and make it easier and safer for her to hike. If her capacity was reduced to being able to only get around with a walker or a wheelchair, she would face barriers in this environment. So it would be great if, you know, there were trails nearby where she could use a walker or wheelchair, so to continue to get out in nature and to be active. So functional ability consists of the intrinsic capacity of the individual, relevant environmental characteristics, and the interaction between them. So the idea of planning environments for healthy aging is to allow people to fully participate and function in community, even when they experience decreases in their intrinsic capacities. Next slide. So some benefits of physical activity. People who engaged in 150 minutes per week of physical activity at a moderate intensity had 31% decrease in mortality compared to those who were less active. It improves physical and mental capacity, maintains muscle strength and cognitive function, reduces anxiety and depression, prevents and reduces risk of disease such as heart disease, diabetes, and stroke, and increases community involvement. So on the flip side, those who don't have access to be active may have higher risk of chronic disease and lower life expectancy. Next slide. Some of the things that make trails age and dementia friendly, and Meg will touch on this a little later, as well as my other colleagues. So benches, places to rest and shade, accessible restrooms with room for caregivers if needed, clear signage with large type at eye level and visible from a wheelchair, smooth surfaces for people with mobility limitations. Destinations or walking loops are great ways to encourage people to get out, and parking or safe walking routes to get to trailheads. Next slide. So this is an example of a sign that's not age friendly. It's high, there's glare, the type is small. I won't share where this is, but I always recognize these things when I see them. So it's a good example of what not to do at a trailhead. Next slide. And some recommendations that have come out of some of our work are to develop a guide to trails that shows level of difficulty and accessibility in each community. Really include older adults and people with disabling conditions to participate in the planning processes. So you want to hear what they want and where they want this to see the fixes. And then develop programming for older adults as well as for children. So that concludes my presentation, and I will turn it over to Meg.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks to the DCR for putting on this presentation today, and for all my co-panelists and all of you who've logged in to spend your time here. I think my slides should be coming up as well, but I'm the founder of Unpaved Trails for All. And I'm going to start just by telling you a little bit about what Unpaved Trails for All is. I'll just wait a second to see if, there we go, the slides. So next slide, please. So Unpaved Trails for All is a grassroots organization that advocates for more accessible trails in Massachusetts. We educate about the importance of accessible trails and the issues surrounding the lack of trails. And we inform trail users about existing trails and what it's like to be out on a trail. We also support new trail projects. So that can be anything from consulting to trail testing to writing letters of support for new projects. Advocacy and education are often two things that go hand in hand. And, you know, I find that access to natural spaces is incredibly important, and a lot of people understand that, but we don't have nearly enough trails to meet the needs for our population. And I don't think people realize the extent of the inequity. So let's look at a little bit at our population in a different way than we might normally look at it. Next slide, please. So Becky touched on some of our population statistics, and for people under age 65 who have a disabling condition, they represent somewhere between 12 and 25% of the population. It's probably closer to 25% because honestly, we don't have great data on who everybody is in that age category. There's also 17% of our current population that's over age 65 and 5% that's under age 5. And so for children who are small, that could be something like their caregiver or parent is using a stroller or a carrier, or they themselves, the toddler, don't have good distance or balance ranges. So altogether, these three cohorts represent 33 to 47% of the state's population. And if you think about that number, and then you think about how many trails that are unpaved that we have that are accessible versus non-accessible, it's not hard to see that there's huge equity issues and environmental justice problems happening in our state right now. Historically and currently, people with disabling conditions have been a marginalized and underserved population. And this is absolutely true in many ways, but including in outdoor recreation. Access to nature is, I believe, a human right. And oftentimes we're also talking about public land. So when we're talking about equity and access, we're also talking about civil rights. And a question that I sometimes get asked is, why specifically unpaved trails? And there are a couple of reasons for that. The first is because if you look at all the types of trails that we have in Massachusetts, these are the trails that we have the fewest of, but also because not all green space is actually created equal. Next slide, please. If you look at spaces, comparing different types of nature, spaces that feel more built or are more built provide less stress relief than spaces that feel more natural. And that's something that's really important for people with disabling conditions. If you go to the next slide, please. Because people with limited mobility, which is the most common type of disabling condition, are significantly more likely to suffer from stress-related illnesses than their peers without mobility. And if you look at the whole population of people with disabling conditions, and that can be anything, not just a mobility limitation, as a whole population, people with disabling conditions score lower on quality of life and standard of living measurements than their non-disabled peers. And we've all here likely seen the medical studies showing that nature helps exactly with these things, quality of life and stress relief. Next slide, please. So what makes a good accessible trail? Well, this picture is a great accessible trail. It's Mount Tom North, and you're going to hear about that after my presentation. But there are some things that make this trail in particular a fabulous one, and some things I've run into on other trails that don't make them as accessible as others. Next slide, please. So some of those things are actually accessible. That's the first thing on my list. And I know that sounds maybe a little bit silly, or you're wondering why it's on there, but it's actually a really big problem. In my experience, about 1 in 3 trails, sometimes as many as approaching half the accessible unpaved trails out there, aren't actually accessible. They have barriers or things that could have easily been avoided in most cases that cause significant, typically mobility device barriers. But in some cases, the trail can be inaccessible in a lot of ways to a lot of different populations. So something specific that should be paid attention to is the surface. You want a surface that is hard and easily compactable, even though it's a natural surface. So you're looking at things like crushed stone instead of gravel. If you put regular standard size gravel on an accessible trail, it won't be accessible because it can't be compacted enough for a mobility device to travel over that surface. It can also pose a tire popping risk for some devices. And that is a really bad thing to happen out in the middle of a trail. Trust me, it has happened to me and it is a bad situation. The next thing on my list is a quality outdoor experience. And when you hear about Mount Tom North next, I know that's something that Peter and Jeff are going to talk about. But I'll just say that if it takes you longer to get your mobility device out of a car than it takes you to go around the entirety of a trail, and if you never lose sight of the parking lot when you're on that trail, that's probably not a place that you want to come back to again and again. Trails that are accessible and unpaved are often very short, and they don't always offer the best outdoor experience. You know, I would say just think about the experience that you want as maybe a non-disabled person, and the feeling of being out in the woods or out in a marsh and truly just in a natural space. That feeling can't be beat. Something else to consider when you're creating trails is the width of the trail. So I know that the regulations say 5 feet, but honestly, they should be wider than 5 feet, because what happens is plant material kind of encroaches and narrows on the trail. That doesn't take very long for that to happen. Also, people tend not to go right to the edge of a trail. They tend to walk down the middle or roll down the middle of a trail. And so the edges are loose and it can be really hard to use a mobility device right up to the edge of that trail. Another reason that they should be wider than 5 feet is because people who use mobility devices want to go out on the trail with their companions. And sometimes their friends and companions are also mobility device users. And there's a huge difference between going down a trail single file and going down a trail side by side. Another thing to consider is the resting areas. There should definitely be seated resting areas on a trail, and they should have an accessible surface underneath them. Having a really wonderfully accessible trail, but having a bench way off the trail on grass is not an accessible surface. And it's not a resting place that's accessible for trail users that need accessibility features. Something else to consider is sun and shade. I find this isn't considered enough, honestly, when trails are being built. If you put a trail through a huge field that's full of sun, that's going to be an intolerable environmental situation for many people with disabling conditions and also some older folks. So giving some thought to, how hot is it going to be on this trail, and are there places that you can get respite from the sun is really important. You want to take accessible parking into account. And that means a couple of things. First, having accessible parking and make sure it's signed and designated. But also, if your parking lot is unpaved, make sure that the surface on the parking lot is also accessible. Something that I see a lot of times is a beautifully surfaced trail that has a gravel parking lot. And then you have to ask, how does somebody get to the trail from their car if that surface is inaccessible? You also want to make sure that there's more than one accessible space, even if the regulations say you only need to have one space, because from my point of view, you have to think about your user and your target audience. If you're building an accessible trail and you want people with disabling conditions to come and use that trail, what does it say if there's only one space for them to park in? You want to take the seated perspective into consideration as much as possible. So if you have tall plants, first of all, they tend to encroach on the trail and narrow the width. But also, if the plants are about as high as your head when you're sitting, or even higher in some cases, that can feel really enclosed, and it can be an entirely different experience from the standing experience on a trail. Another place to consider plants and railing heights from a seated perspective is also in viewing spots. So if you go through the time and expense and thought of putting in a scenic view, but nobody in a seated position can see the view, that's a real shame. Becky touched on some of these things, but restrooms, definitely. If you can have any sort of restroom at a trail site, it's automatically going to be a more accessible space. And whether they're built or they're portable, as long as they're accessible and open, that is great. You also want to consider non-visual signage and navigation on a trail. That's something that we just don't have enough of on accessible trails. And there's a whole spectrum of devices and disabling conditions. And so oftentimes I think the default is to think about one type of condition, a mobility condition with one type of device, a wheelchair, but there's a whole spectrum of devices and conditions that really should be considered. Public transportation is another one of those things that doesn't get taken into consideration often enough. It is so hard to find an accessible trail on public transportation. So for people who can't drive or don't drive, getting to a nature space independently can be a real problem. So if your trail is on a public transportation line, please make that information known. And if you're going to build a trail, consider some properties that can be accessed through public transportation. You also want to take sensory and environmental barriers into consideration. That goes back to the whole spectrum of conditions that people can have. So for example, if there are loud noises on your trail or near your trail property, an athletic field, for example, that's located next to a trail, if there are games at that field every weekend between spring, summer, and fall, for someone with a sensory sensitivity, visiting that trail on a Saturday might not be a great experience, but visiting that trail on a weekday may be perfect for them. So putting that information somewhere like online could be really good. And that brings me to the last bullet point on this list, which is put your trail information online. So things like the address, how you can get to the trail, even if there's no address, what is the parking like, how long is the trail, what's the surface, what's the width, if there's feature or barrier information, that's a great place to include it, because something that not a lot of people take into account is that more so with any other trail, a visit to an accessible trail starts at home. So it starts with, looking up, is this trail a place that I can visit? Can I go by myself? Do I need a companion possibly? What is it like? Am I going to be able to do it? Pictures and video of trails, fantastic thing to include. And then, I would just say, also along the lines of putting information out there, it's not on this list, but really with accessible trails, you kind of have to sometimes do a little bit of work to make those trails known. So give the information about your trail to senior centers and disability commissions in the communities around you. Try to get the news to cover your trail, even if it isn't new, just so that people know that it's there. Put the information out to maybe medical facilities or rehabilitation or retirement communities. And send the information to Unpaved Trails for All, because we have a list of trails and we desperately want to know about all the trails in the state. So my last slide, if you could switch to the next slide, please, is the contact information. So unpavedtrailsforall.org is our website. There's information on there about the issues surrounding the lack of trails. There's also information about things you might, want to look for if you're building trails, like inclusive language. And our email is unpavedtrailsforall@gmail.com. And our Instagram is @unpavedtrailsforall, and that's with the number 4. So thank you very much. I look forward to the question and answer portion, and I'll send things over to Jeff and Peter to tell you about their project Mount Tom North.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Meg, and thank you everyone for being here. Meg has been, kind of an advisor for our project, and I really value her input so much. And I will admit I was scribbling a couple notes as you were talking about things that we can still do to make our trail better. But again, thank you very much for having me. I'm Jeff Begum, the city planner in East Hampton, and I am here with Peter Flinker, who's going to kind of do some slides at the end. You can start with slide number 1 for a moment. That'd be great. A couple people I just want to thank. So, the City of East Hampton, the Community Preservation Act committee, and the fund has been just really integral to this project, very generous in their providing funds for this project. We have a local land trust in East Hampton. It's the Pascomic Conservation Trust. And so they have other trail systems in East Hampton. They have an accessible trail on East Street called Mutter's Field. And they've been doing great work in East Hampton for over 20 years. Kestrel Land Trust is a partner in this project as well. Definitely want to thank them for their help and support in navigating a bunch of different aspects of this. And then the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, the PARC program, has been critical. I think without the PARC program, we wouldn't have this trail that we have now in East Hampton. And then last but not least, Dodson and Flinker. Just a special shout out to Peter Flinker and his firm. We really had a really great match with them as a consultant. I really think that they took this project under their wing. It's as much their trail as it is the city's trail, and kind of everyone who gets to visit it. It's really a group effort. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of the ribbon cutting. So we just opened the trail on September 9th. And I went through some notes, and as I was preparing, and I would say that we started construction on September 20th, 2021. So we've been at it for a year. We're actually still in punch list items with the contractor, but the trail's open and it's available for people. A couple quick details. Peter will show some maps in a little bit, but the trail that we built is about 2,000 feet long. It's a loop trail. It is 5 feet wide, and it's compacted crushed stone. And Peter will talk about how we strive to meet the Forest Service standards for accessibility. There are 7 standard parking spaces and 2 accessible spaces. And we did make the decision early on to actually pave the entire parking lot. So it is a blacktop surface. There are 3 bike racks, 2 map kiosks. There's 3 accessible picnic tables throughout. And then as you're traversing up the trail, there's 5 resting areas and 5 benches. And then each of those areas has an interpretive sign. A unique aspect of this trail that you'll see throughout the presentation is that we are really appealing to, the widest range of users as possible. And so that's the Forest Service accessible portion. But we were really lucky with not lucky, I mean, we were really strategic in picking this location. And through the past couple of years, we've partnered with the New England Scenic Trail, who has kind of had an ad hoc trailhead in this vicinity. And so we've all agreed that this will become the trailhead for the New England Scenic Trail, this section. There's a hiking loop trail that is on the Kestrel parcel. So it's an easy hike around in the woods. And then it's also an opportunity to access the Mount Tom State Reservation. So this one site has these kind of multiple different areas that you can access. And that's really been helpful for opening it up to a wider range of user groups. A couple really quick notes while I'm still on this slide. We have just kind of finished and established a web page for the site, which, as Meg had noted, the importance of providing information online. So we're trying to do that. We do have some things that we're going to add based on what she was saying earlier. We also utilize Google Maps. And so there's a way that you can import information to Google Maps. So if you're looking for this, it's 96 East Street or Mount Tom Trail, North Head Park. And it will get you to there with some information, some visuals and the map. We have established a donation account through our city council. And so this will be to receive gifts of benches or other items, and then also any donations for people who want to contribute funds to help the future maintenance. And we've also begun to transition the property from this planning and conceptual phase through construction, and it is now a property that our parks department is going to be actively managing. And so we're going through that process now, and we are planning to have a line item established in next year's municipal budget to provide the kind of necessary maintenance budget for the project. So I think with that, you can go to the next slide. The location on this map, we're on the east side of East Hampton. I think the highlight here is that the city has always identified this section of East Street. It's kind of the foothills of Mount Tom as being a really important area. It's listed in our open space plan, and it's been identified as a priority. There are some protected parcels, and then this was an addition to that. And as you can see, it borders Mount Tom State Reservation. So those are kind of important parts of the project location. And then lastly, it is very close to the Manhan Rail Trail, which we would see a future phase to try to better connect a pedestrian or bicyclist who's on the rail trail to get up to this site. So we're scoping out how to make these future connections still happen. I think what we'll do is go to the next slide. This is an aerial photograph kind of facing the project site. In total, it's 22 acres that was acquired, and there's a portion that's city owned and then a portion that was acquired by Kestrel Land Trust. And part of the partnership is that we hold the conservation restriction for the Kestrel parcel, and Kestrel holds the conservation restriction for our parcel. And so we've worked really kind of closely with them on that arrangement. And then, kind of a quick summary of how we got here. There was a preliminary subdivision plan that got filed back in January of 2018, and that really kind of had this impetus effect of really pushing us forward. We applied for the first park grant in July of 2018, and that was awarded to us, and that was funding, that was $400,000 towards the acquisition. And to provide the city's share of that, our CPA committee contributed $340,000 to that. Plus we had an $85,000 conservation partnership grant, an $85,000 beverage foundation grant, and then there was some funds that were provided by Kestrel Land Trust and Pascomic that secured an option agreement for us to gather. It gave us time to gather the funds and come up with some plans. And from there, we sought some funds from our CPA committee to go through a design phase. And that's when we were really lucky and worked with Dotson and Flinker to do some community outreach. And then we applied again for another park grant for construction, and we were awarded that in late 2020. And so that was another $374,000 that was granted by the park program and $176,000 from CPA. So if you tally that up, we're, East Hampton's really committed into this parcel and the vision for it. So I think with that, you can go to the next slide, please. So this is kind of an image, obviously, but it's trying to represent the collaboration that we've had throughout the project. This is after the parcel had been acquired and when we began working with Dotson and Flinker. And around the table is Kestrel Land Trust, Pascomic Conservation Trust. We have a couple members of our CPA committee. We have a couple members of our Conservation Commission, and we have the planning department. And so this this is really kind of representative of how the project has unfolded over time, is to maintain the partnership, and the collaboration's been just really important. And I think Peter and I were talking that this was January of 2020. So not too soon after this, the pandemic hit, and we did all of our community outreach and community meetings virtually after this. So this was just a rare glimpse of what it used to look like when you could collaborate. I think with that, you can go to the next slide, Peter. Thank you. So, this is a graphic, so it's spun around the opposite way, but this is basically the city's parcel. It's about 12 acres, and the owner had been kind of pushing for a 9-lot subdivision, and they pursued this rather aggressively. So they went through preliminary subdivision, then they got definitive subdivision, and the timelines were all overlapping, where the property owner was doing what the property owner should do, is that they were securing this potential to happen. It definitely increased the value of the property. But what it through some discussions, Kestrel Land Trust in particular was really instrumental in reaching out directly to the property owner and talking to them about an option agreement. And while they were pursuing they finished pursuing the subdivision, and then they were agreeable to entering into an option agreement for a year to give the city and its partners the opportunity to gather the funds. And in thinking strategically about other projects where there's development pressure, that option agreement was really critical. Without that, we would have never been able to keep pace with the private developers. I often say that as a municipality, we are one of our biggest flaws is we're slow. We are not as adaptive and quick as the private market. So the option agreement was what I wanted to highlight with that. So I think you can go to the next slide, Peter. Great. And then, so here's kind of just another orientation. What I wanted to point out here was that we have a lot of neighbors, and I worked really hard, and other people have worked really hard to maintain a good relationship with the abutting property owners. It's proven to be pretty important that the realization is that the subdivision never happened, and they're grateful for that. But then they have seen the transformation of this property. They are seeing people walk kind of nearby in the woods, and one of the things that we are actually struggling with is that with the 7 parking spaces plus the 2 accessible, and probably the timeline that we opened in this beautiful fall that we've had, the demand for the site has been intense. And so we're really kind of actively managing the parking and people's access, as it's a new site that lots of people want to go check out. One of our goals on the upper right-hand side of this map is this small little side street called Underwood. And that had been the informal parking area for the New England Trail. And to get up to the state land, we've actually had to kind of push people over there a little bit to kind of relieve some of the pressure. Originally, that had been a goal to kind of eliminate the parking on Underwood, and we will probably revisit that. But the demand and usage has been tremendous, and I think that's a good thing. As part of that, we did work with Pioneer Valley Planning Commission, and they have some technology out on the trail to sense users using the trail. And so we're collecting data on usage pretty much since a couple weeks after it opened. And so we're hoping to use that data to continue to demonstrate that the investment in outdoor recreation and preserving these parcels is really worth it with the number of people that can access the site. And then Peter, next slide. Great. And so this is kind of the last slide that I'll speak to. This is kind of the schematic design. And so you can see the layout of the parking area, traversing through the site. And what I wanted to highlight here is that we took an extra step and we funded a design phase. And that was really critical because it allowed all of us to get on the same page and understand what the site was going to do and how it was going to function. And one of the things that we tested out with the community meetings was, we had a couple graphics that showed, a large sort of Goshen stone patio with we had a food truck up there and it kind of demonstrating like a wedding. And the people who were participating said, no, that's not what we want. We want something that's more passive, more in touch with the natural environment up there. So that really helped guide us as to where this current use was going to go and kind of set the expectation for the future use. The last couple of things, just in time and trying to highlight a team. We're really grateful with Dodson and Flinker. They've been great. The other really important part of this was the contractor. And so we were actually really lucky that we had Gagliarducci Construction as the bidder who won the project. And it's a unique project, as Peter will probably touch on at some point. This is a trail carved on the side of a hill, and so the contractor, should get a lot of credit for kind of making that work. It's not something that they do every day, but based on this webinar and the Mass Trails program, it's something that we hope to see happen more often. So I give kudos to everyone that's been involved. There's been a lot of people, and I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to Peter, so he can kind of talk through some of the technical details. So thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here. Yeah, this is a really interesting project because of all the sort of diverse goals, but also a really interesting site. I mean, one of the things you can see is all the contours on this plan. And that was sort of the challenge and the opportunity is how do you create an accessible trail that goes up the side of a hill? And one of the ways you do that is you walk up and down the hill a lot with GPS equipment and figure out what's the best balance of exploring the site and revealing the different elements, and then also making it reasonably accessible. So that was, in addition to a pretty robust public process at the beginning, it was sort of a robust process of getting out on the site and really looking at how do we fit this thing to this place in a way that reveals the natural features of the site, but also makes it relatively easy to get up. And it also was sort of a scenario planning process, which we say as designers, and that it wasn't sort of a linear process of do all the analysis and come up with a plan. Is we, from the very beginning, did a whole bunch of different alternatives and walked people through them, if you will. And sort of through the different public meetings, we had polling actually in the online meetings. We talked to a lot of people in the field, a lot of people in the town, and basically came up with a plan which has this small parking lot and this narrow access point. The trail curves up around the edge of a meadow. There's actually an old spring here, which is very interesting, and then winds up through the woods, hits an upper meadow, and then curves back into the woods and around. So each of these turnings has a logical purpose. So it's not just going back and forth to get up the hill at an accessible grade, but it's really trying to make the accessible grades integrated with the process of going up the hill as an experience. And then, as Jeff said, it is more or less a one-way loop all the way up, a one-way trail all the way up, but there is a loop at the top, which reveals a different part of that experience. And when you get to the top, one of the great things about this is not, the best view in the valley, but it is a really interesting view with the historic Oxbow in the foreground and the hills of Northampton and Williamsburg in the distance. We originally were hoping to make the thing completely accessible at no more than 5%, which seemed on paper to be doable. But when we actually got out there and we went out there and staked out different trail routes using a laser level, we actually discovered that to do it at 5% made it it didn't fit the site conceptually. You could have done it physically, but it didn't make sense in terms of the exploration of the site. So instead of making it completely accessible at 5%, we use the Forest Service Trail Accessibility Guidelines, which allows short areas of the trail to exceed 5%, as you see here, between 1 and 12 and 1 and 8. It's maximum length of 30 feet. You have to have a landing between 1 and 10 and 1 and 8. Sorry, between 1 and 12, 1 and 10. It's 30 feet. Between 1 and 10 and 1 and 8, it's 10 feet. So it's building on the sort of traditions of the ADA ramp access, but a little bit more leeway in terms of fitting into the slopes. And we found that using this, it fit pretty well. And then a big part of this was then, how do you make a trail that's a natural surface of crushed stone, but that doesn't wash away because it's on the side of the hill. So a lot of attention to the grading of the slopes, the grading of the trail, so it would have a good cross slope in both directions. You wouldn't have any water washing over it. This is a 5-foot trail, partly due to cost. But there are areas where it widens out, where you can pass pretty frequently. Those are also associated with the benches. And then some areas that just kind of got wider as a matter of construction. Well, so it's sort of a little bit loose as it goes through. This is sort of the final plan, and it shows the Forest Service trail accessibility guidelines compliant trail in yellow, which sort of winds up around the meadow and eventually up into a meadow with wildflowers and a picnic lawn. And then that connects to a non-accessible trail that continues around Little Mountain, called the Little Mountain Loop. And there's also, there's one kiosk at the bottom and a small kiosk at the top that provides the trailhead to the Nonotuck Trail, which is part of the New England Scenic Trail that goes up to the top of Mount Nonotuck and extends across the range of Mount Tom. One of the interesting things about this was the ability to also incorporate interpretive materials. You could see one of these areas where the trail flattens out at one of the hairpins, and there's a bench there for resting and also a place for an interpretive sign. And we tried to make this, the signage incorporated in each part of the site. So as you first arrived, it talks about the changing landscape of the valley. As you go up, as in this picture with the bench, talks about the successional plan for how the meadows, we have a sort of both a short meadow and a taller shrub meadow that are growing up there. As you get up into the woods again, there's a sign about geology. Then you get to the top, there's one which has literally the view sort of interpreted as it unfolds in front of you. At the very top, there's a historical sign, which is at the old driveway, which was the original access to something called the Erie House, which was one of the original sort of mountain top houses overlooking the Connecticut River. Really interesting story, which unfortunately we don't have time to go over right now. This is the trail under construction, and you can see some of that elaborate sort of grading work that was done. There's a 6-inch minimum swale on the uphill side of the trail. There's carefully graded side banks on the sides so that it doesn't have edging. The gravel is set right into the surface with a siltation barrier on top of a gravel base. But it's very carefully done so that there's a firm edge along the sides. And then this has been seeded with grass. And so it has this very nice sort of natural look with the grass along the edge. Even though it's been pretty carefully graded, it doesn't look that unnatural. And then one of the features you see here is at several points along the trail, there are culverts. So this is where the water will come down the slope into this culvert and pass underneath the trail. And that's very important, as we discovered, to channel water off of the trail and out of the drainage system and back into the woods. So this is a cross section of one of those trail culverts, basically drops down to 12 inches of depth to provide access to a PVC pipe that carries the water underneath the trail. And then there's geotextile and then 6 inches of gravel above that. And again, it's 5 feet wide with a 2% cross slope. And that has been maintained pretty carefully. So the water can't flow along this trail, it has to flow to the side, which is absolutely essential to prevent scouring. And this is actually the trail being tested by very heavy rains this summer. And you see we have at the base of the trail, next to the parking lot, there's a rain garden, which is completely filled with water. So we found out that that worked pretty well. The trail itself has held up really well with that cross slope for the most part to rain-based erosion. But one of the things we discovered is that it was really hard to establish firm enough growth of grass in the swales over the course of the summer, which is of course when grass is planted. It's really hard to establish that in between the rainstorms so it actually grow in. So there were some areas, as you see here, we had to come back and add just basically gravel along the base of the swale, figuring that it's never going to be able to really grow in before the next rainstorm. So probably, 80% of the trail worked as specified, and some small areas where it really was picking up the most water, we had to put gravel in. We also had to use sod around the edge of the rain garden to get that started. Really wasn't time to wait for grass to grow. We had to put in some extra swales to carry water off to the side, up around the top, around the meadow. And then just recently, we decided to put in an extra sort of infiltration basin at the top of the hill to catch the water coming off the upper meadow before it goes back into the woods. But we discovered it was just too much water coming off and going into the woods and creating erosion. So again, as you know, anybody who constructs trails, there's a certain amount of trial and error, even though you have the whole thing down on paper. And the contractors were very good about finding ways to work with the site and make it work better. So this is the trail as on opening day. You can see we really used a lot of these sort of curving alignments, both because it's sort of a beautiful way to experience the site, and also because it really works best in terms of course, getting the grades as shallow as possible to make it more accessible, and also to make the drainage work, because a trail that of course is curving, it's easier to guide the water off to the side. And this is the upper kiosk where you see the sort of small kiosk and a picnic area, also accessible. And then here you see some of the meadow treatment. Now, originally, all of this was planted as a meadow, and then over the course of the summer, working with the Parks Department, they decided that it's probably better to have more lawn up there. So they cut some of it back, and so it's going to have this sort of picnic lawn at the top, and then areas of natural meadow further down. I wanted to say sort of one other approach to trail surfacing we've been working with is using stabilized stone dust, which is basically the same material we used at Mount Tom, but using a stabilizing product in that, which is sort of a step forward into adding more stability. And there's sort of a couple of products. You're probably familiar with Stabilizer, which has been around for like 30 years. There's another one called Organic Lock, and a number of other preparatory, however you pronounce that, a number of other products that are available on the market. But basically, these are hydrophilic substances made of natural materials that are mixed with the gravel subbase, and allows you, when you put it down, they attract water and basically create a binder that holds it. And when it's dry, it sort of releases the gravel, but when it's wet, in the fall and the winter particularly, it tightens it up and holds it in place. And so this is a project up on Great Blue Hill that we've been working with DCR on. And this is a renovation of a historic tower that was built by the CCC in the 1930s. And a lot of erosion had taken place in recent years. So in addition to bringing back the gravel and raising up to the right grades to make it accessible route into the tower area, we used the Stabilizer product so that it would hold on a little bit better. And then this is some other features. One of the things we've discovered with Stabilizer is, even though the surface itself is much more firm than an untreated stone dust or gravel surface, it can erode, particularly if you get any water running sort of and scouring along the edge. So we discovered in a number of places, like just putting larger gravel along the edge so that the water can get off of it and it's not held on the trail where it can run parallel to the trail, but really can run off to the side. So that's the end of my presentation. And I think the next person is Rebecca.
Great, thank you. And I believe my presentation is ready to go. So thanks for having me and thanks for being here. My name is Rebecca Cornell. I'm the Conservation Administrator and Assistant Planner with the town of South Hadley. And I'm going to talk about the River to Range Trail. Next slide. South Hadley is located in Hampshire County. We have the Mount Holyoke Range as our northern border and the Connecticut River as our eastern border. East Hampton and Mount Tom are just across the Connecticut River here, and I might be biased, but I think it's a very beautiful area. Next slide. The River to Range Trail is located at 240 Ferry Street, where there is a 10-car parking lot, and it was constructed in 2018. We have a lot of other open spaces in South Hadley between the conservation areas, parks, and the recreation areas. We have just over 1,000 acres of conservation land managed by the Conservation Commission, and the River to Range Trail is by far our most heavily used. Next slide. I've been working for South Hadley just over a year, and while I wasn't involved with the design and construction of this project, I am responsible for the care and maintenance of this property through the South Hadley Conservation Commission. The concept for this trail began when the Pioneer Valley Planning Commission was working on a scenic byways in the Connecticut River Valley. And in this work, they saw an opportunity for a hiking connection between the Connecticut River and the Mount Holyoke Range. And even in early discussions, it was always envisioned to have a section of this trail be accessible to all users. Funding came through the Mass Trails Grant Program, phase 1 for design and permitting, and phase 2 for the construction of a 1-mile loop and parking lot. And Conservation Works was the consultant on the project. Next slide. The River to Range Trail is located at the Bachelor Brook, Stony Brook Conservation Area, which I believe is just a little over 200 acres. And it's part of the Bachelor Brook Greenway Corridor, which runs across town. Among the unique features of this property, there are 2 of the best examples in the state of small floodplain forests and numerous rare habitats. This type of floodplain forest provides important flood storage capacity and a diverse habitat for flora and fauna. And the River to Range Trail is located on the lower left map you see on your screen in this conservation area. Next slide. The 1-mile loop is designed to accommodate people with impaired mobility, such as in wheelchairs or with walkers. So this is not a completely accessible trail. And that's because there's one steep section in the woods through the floodplain forest that is up towards or at 12% grade. And the middle photo here is taken at the top of that hill looking down the steep section. And we were able to do this design a trail and still keep it reasonably accessible or under the forestry standards because there's regularly spaced stopping areas along the hill. And in this photograph, you're looking at one of those stopping areas. So it's a little pull-off place. And the primary reason that this steep section was not brought down to grade was due to the presence of artifacts of Indigenous people. As part of the permitting, some archaeological digging was done and artifacts were found. And if we had wanted to reduce the grade further here, we would have had to do a lot more archaeological work, and that just wasn't in the scope. So this was the compromise. Next slide. The walking path consists of compacted crushed aggregate surface. It loops around a farm field and into the floodplain forest and back out around the farm field. The field is hayed by a local farmer a few times a year through a local farm agreement. They use the hay to feed their dairy cows here in town. And the photo on the right there is taken at the bottom of the steep hill. You can kind of see how the trail meanders out of the frame to the right and then up the hill. And the floodplain is on the left there, and there's no water in this photograph because it's a dry time of year. The trail is very popular among the older population. We have groups from outside South Hadley that come and hold walking events there for seniors. It's also very popular among dog walkers, dog owners, families with strollers, and people using motorized wheelchairs, which is great because that's exactly the type of people we want using it. Next slide. So there's 5 seating areas along the trail route with interpretive signs. There's 6 interpretive signs total. They're mounted on these little posts that you can see there with a cement base in the ground. Each sign is on a different topic specific to this area. They include the floodplain forest, dragonflies. We have some rare species of dragonflies in this area. Freshwater mussels, native people, wetlands, and the Bachelor Brook watershed. Next slide, please. So in the 5 seating areas, we chose to go with local stone as opposed to wood because it's more durable. This larger seating area on the upper right is within the floodplain forest. You're looking out at that point. It's a nice little resting spot in the woods. And I'd like to point out that the photo on the lower left was taken by one of our residents and submitted as part of a photo contest that we held last spring. Next slide. Despite this being a highly used trail, it does have its challenges. Eversource has a large transmission line easement that runs through the property. Depending on what type of work they're doing, particularly with upgrades over the last few years, it can interfere with daily use of the trails. However, the power lines they cross over Bachelor Brook and go up into Bachelor Brook North. And from the height of the land there, you have a very nice view of the Connecticut River and Mount Tom. Next slide. And one of the things we have received the most complaints about in the last year is the parking lot drainage. This has gotten worse in recent years. There is a bordering vegetative wetland to the east, so to the left of the parking lot. And there was an initial French drain installed when the trail was constructed, but some adjustments are now needed to the design. And I'm happy to say that we do have funding to address this next year. We will likely raise up the parking lot and resurface as much of the trail as we can and try to get that problem controlled, because people do use this trail all year round, and when there is ice covering it, it's not ideal for users of all ages and abilities. One of the amazing benefits we do have is Parks and DPW. They have an attachment for the Ventrac machine, which they use to grade and maintain the trail. So this helps keep it nice and smooth when it's not flooded. Next slide. So as I mentioned, my unspoken heroes are the South Hadley Parks Department that works under the DPW. Thankfully, they take a lot of pride in this area and the work that they do. They see the people use it and they realize it's a huge asset to South Hadley. So the Parks Department comes out here at least once a month to mow the trail, mow the sides of the trail. And I believe they actually do it twice a month, even though the agreement is that they'll do it once. And then about once a year, they go around with a big mower on the boom and cut back the overgrowth along the trail. Like some of the hanging vines you can see in this photo. But what they don't have time to do is the smaller maintenance items. So this means that the 5 seating areas, or at least the ones that are out in the sun, they become overwhelmed with weeds, and smaller branches that fall on the trail need attention from time to time. So at least twice a year, usually in the spring and the fall, I organize events with local volunteers to attend to some of these smaller maintenance items. Next slide. I'm really lucky to have the Volunteer Conservation Corps in South Hadley. So this is a group of, this is a handful of volunteers that are dedicated to helping out around town. They like to get out and work with their hands They like working in the conservation areas and giving back to their communities. We even have one volunteer that will come out with his lawnmower and keep the place looking fresh. They really treat it like their own backyard, and I can't express how welcoming this feels and how appreciative I am to have them to help maintain our conservation areas. And this area in particular wouldn't be what it is without our volunteers. Next slide. And whenever I can, I love to work with the high school students. These photographs are when the trail was first constructed back in 2018. They organized a work party day with the Volunteer Conservation Corps. The students came out and did a bunch of plantings along the trail of native plants, and you can see they're all smiles. Next slide. And then just back to the conservation course. The Conservation Commission in South Hadley is responsible for overseeing just over 1,000 acres of land. That's a lot of land, and we wouldn't have areas like the River to Range Trail or this beautiful bench at Leaping Well Nature Trail, or be able to maintain the trees in the Arboretum. We wouldn't be able to do any of that without them. And it's really important to make them feel appreciated and keep them involved in regular projects throughout the year to make sure that they know that I appreciate them and I need them. Next slide. When I think about involvement, I like to think about the entire community, not just the people that show up to my events and the people that already know about our conservation areas. I also like to think about how I can connect with the folks that don't know about these open spaces. So last year, we started a monthly e-newsletter called Conservation Connections, and it is focused on connecting people, places, community, and the environment. South Hadley's conservation areas are open to everyone, and we hope to make more trails accessible in the future. Thank you. And I believe next up is Andrew.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. Appreciate the short introduction and the transition. For everyone, I have a camera to my left and a monitor to my right, so I may have my eyes cross over once or twice, but I am speaking directly to the audience as I do so. My name is Andrew. I'm a partner and an executive at a firm called TerraGenesis, and our current primary work is actually in agricultural commodities and data design for tracking supply chains. However, we do have a small area of the business that works on landscape-based projects, and including the Lake Wallace Sensory Trail, which is a project that I began out of the Conway School in Northampton, Massachusetts in 2017 and worked on for the past 5 years until its initial phase was constructed and completed in August of this year. So I'm presenting on a very long project and its evolution over the past 5 years, but I'm going to focus specifically on design details of the project as a way to sort of etch out what makes it special, in addition to a general context of how this project is notable in the Belchertown community and the state at large. The Lake Wallace Sensory Trail is a 2,500 foot long accessible trail with design features that make it what is considered a sensory trail. And we'll get into the specifics of that, but the general premise here is a trail that is designed to accommodate a wide range of users who are otherwise disenfranchised or not engaged through direct design elements of the community. To begin, we can go over some of the details in this slideshow, but I'll offer that we do have a Facebook page and a website for the project, and you can view more resources that have to do with the specifics of the design, the partners and stakeholders involved in the project over the past couple of years, as well as the opportunity to visit the trail through a map and also donate to future aspects of the project. We are working on different phases at the present moment, but the website covers the first phase, which was recently constructed. And if you wish to visit the trail, it's located here. The pink arrows indicate where the entrances are. It's roughly sort of like in this quadrangle between Christopher Heights assisted living community, the senior center, and Little Fenway, the Chestnut Hill Recreation Area, just due south of the center of Belchertown. The two areas I'm just going to cover are the trail and its context, how it came to be, and then the design details of the sensory aspect of the trail specifically. So just a sort of broad stroke, who's been working on this? The answer is a lot of people. The team has kind of swelled and contracted over the years, depending on what phase of the project we were in. But I have been among the more consistent of the team members from its start in 2017. I've worked most recently with a design associate at our firm, MJ, who's actually coordinated a lot of the storytelling of the trail and co-managed the web presence and the social media sort of releasing of all of the different areas of the project we've encountered over the past 8 to 9 months as we entered the construction phase, as well as another key driver and proponent of the project, Doug Albertson, who's a town planner of Belchertown. It's his sort of vision and I'm articulating and implementing it, but Doug has really been one of the chief proponents here, as well as Bucky Sparkle, who's been our civil engineer and has permitted the project, got us over all the permitting hurdles and the finish line, and is now actually working with me and Doug on the second and third phase of the project. I wouldn't be remiss to mention that in 5 years, we've interacted with a lot of stakeholders. This has been a project that's sort of been a gravitational pull for various different organizations in Belchertown, Pioneer Valley, and the state. It's involved different partners and different vendors who've supported us in engineering, community engagement like Proterra and Civic Space Collaborative, DCR Massachusetts, the Commonwealth Executive Office of Housing and Development for fundraising, Landscape Interactions, who did our ecological assessment, the Hitchcock Center, who met with myself, my business partner in 2018 to tell us why storytelling and environmental education was so important, and a whole host of others who have donated or supported us or offered their assistance and their guidance in developing this project and bringing it to fruition. So just an interesting note here, there's sort of a sense that trail projects have a direct benefit in the community. It's a place where you can get outside and bring people and gather around something of significance, either these small groups who use trails as a way to recreate or sometimes disappear into the woods, depending on the nature of their adventure, but also as something that has a meaningful draw to different parts of communities, many of whom may not actually be reached. And where we've sort of come from to how we're arriving at the point we are at this moment is the fact that we've built this project based on a community-driven initiative. Over 5 years, it's been a lot of work to find all of the stakeholders and where they believe they can contribute value to the project, how they can contribute it, and what specifically that generates in terms of community cohesion and project cohesion. And also to really seek out kind of beyond the superficial aspect of who needs to be engaged in this project, especially groups that are historically marginalized, persons with disabilities, sensory limitations, and members of the elderly community, all of which live in Belchertown and the communities adjacent, and all of which do have a stake in a project like this being successful. And as part of that, what we really want to see is not just something built for the sake of, it's really about generating a sense of a place and a trail being a hub for activity and what is generated by community members when they enjoy or visit that space on their own terms, and how that influences or projects across different aspects of community initiatives like walkability, recreation, outdoor learning, public safety, and even landscape stewardship. So very briefly, I'll try to encompass 5 years of work in 15 seconds. I'll do my best for that. But what the real focus is going to be on is the past year of work built on 4 years of prior initiatives. So in the spring of 2017, Doug Albertson contacted myself and my student partner at the Conway School, her name is Amanda, to design a concept plan for a trails master plan for Belchertown, Massachusetts. And the focus area was the then remnants of the Belchertown State School property, and really looking at whether trails can become an element of this landscape that bring connectivity and also rehabilitate and revitalize a space that was both underserved, had a strong sense of history attached to it, and also needed revitalization in alignment with the town's plans to redevelop the space. And that sort of like core inception grew over many years. And in particular, as myself and my business partner started our own design firm to take a project in this kind of very nascent stage and bring it to fruition. We went through multiple years of concept design, fundraising, engineering, and permitting to lead us to construction, which began in summer of 2021 and took about a year to complete based on our fundraising timelines that we had been establishing. We really pushed this over the finish line in summer 2022. So hat tip to the One Stop Community Grant, who extended a $250,000 grant in the spring of this year, which got us right over the finish line for construction requirements in terms of cost, and gave us the ability to really accelerate a timeline that we had been methodically sort of laying out just in case the fundraising was going to be partial. And this one really let us sort of put our foot on the gas and get this to a place that we thought was necessary for completion. And we did so by opening the project on the 29th of August of this year. So almost 5 years and 3 months to the day, the project in its first phase was complete. Where we are now is looking at the engineering of the second and third phase, which is another mile expansion of the trail in the same design, but in different areas of the same landscape. And from that, we'll work with the next sort of iterations of fundraising, project bidding, engineering, and construction to get us to a full completion of the project as originally envisioned. So the special element of this design, I could talk about this for probably about 3 days, but to be very specific, what is really a standout is the fact that we use the opportunity for the trail's unique placement on the grounds of the former Belchertown State School and the historical connections that place had with the community to look at what a trail could do, not just to support recreation, but also bring a revitalization to the idea that a trail can do more for a community that had been underserved. And the sensory trail was an aspect we looked at and eventually chose as a way to extend that reach to those communities. And there's different iterations of a sensory trail depending on how you envision it. The original concept is actually oriented towards an equestrian focus, where the same elements of there being a way to engage through a multi-sensory approach with users who use equestrians or use an equine-based therapy approach. We took that and sort of shifted it towards the idea that you can still do the same thing, but you can do it while walking or in wheelchairs or assisted mobile devices. And what we arrive at is a series of experiences on a route designed to engage different senses and collectively immerse people, which is the key here, on a multi-sensory journey, and specifically and including persons who have sensory limitations like blindness or deafness, or cognitive limitations like dementia. The key elements that arrive out of that are design-based components, which not necessarily in order of priority, but more or less how one engages with the landscape to engage a tactile or transitionary, visual, auditory, or olfactory sensory experience. Auditory and olfactory are sort of not directly implicated in the design, but there's a way of the design as it's laid out, creating a series of steps where pausing or being in a particular place engages your auditory senses or your olfactory senses to create a more clear picture of what you're seeing, even and especially if you can't literally see it or you can't hear it, or you have a distance learning limitation that requires some sort of building of context and the support of others or yourself with the aid of these components. And I'll go through a couple of the components in detail and also how they turned out on the trail. But what we found throughout the construction process, and also now that the trail is open, that there's a whole different way of looking at this project depending on how one is using it. And that we're finding immediately that the users going to this trail for whatever reason they choose are actually seeing the place that they're in, the area around Lake Wallace and the former Belchertown State School, in a new way that we didn't actually intend to, but they are able to see this and build a story for themselves and also a memory of the place. The first fact of building a sensory trail on the tactile sense was to engage the user base who would be blind or have a limited sight impression. This was key because sort of the immediate apparentness of going into a place is the fact that you can see it. You can build a picture of what's in front of you and you can relate that to common experiences or historical ones in order to understand exactly what's happening. And we knew this wasn't going to be possible for everyone. So the first element here was really taking that and informing how we can address it. And we used tactile and especially Braille components. And the primary sort of design feature we worked with was a rope guide, which in this instance conveys the entire length of the trail, including the structures that are on the trail, like the boardwalks, with a series of steps by which you would engage different signs or different tactile components, like mounted buttons on posts, which tell you when to stop to touch a Braille sign, the Braille sign itself, which has a visual element to it that allows it for more visibility with high contrast, but is also Braille, so you can read what is in front of you. And we've sort of integrated these in a way in which, depending on how one uses the trail, they can tell themselves or build a story of what they're seeing or what they're walking by. And when these come into play, it's really adding to a series of layers of storytelling on this landscape. So the trail has moved from just being a place to walk and to see things to being a multi-layered sort of storytelling experience where someone is building these stories for themselves and they're reading and seeing what they're experiencing and then relating that to the things that they hear or they smell or that they can touch. And the signs here we've used are very simplistic. They are meant to be viewed at a reasonable height level. And each one connotes a specific area of the trail that you're in, so you can actually distinguish what features may be around you, as well as where you are going and what features may be in front of you, so you know that there's a transition between the stone and the stone dust trail base itself and perhaps a boardwalk structure which may be a few feet in front of you. On the tactile end, beyond going from the signs, we also chose to use a cable guide as a way to provide support for users who may require support who are elderly, but also in a sense for users who are blind to be able to run themselves along the trail without interference and to know exactly where they're going and what is in front of them. And this is a very simplistic approach where we use a stainless steel aircraft cable. It's very lightweight, it's weather resistant, it will outlast probably everything else in the trail, with a series of small wooden markers that will doubly indicate not just a sign as previously shown, but perhaps a resting spot that would be to the opposite side of where someone is standing. And this runs the entire length of the trail so that the entirety of the experience can be engaged by someone. It also happens to be a great integration where we've kind of like roped off different areas of the trail for ecological restoration or stewardship. And so the Conservation Commission and our local groups can be able to literally bisect certain areas of the landscape for specific use or approaches and be able to tell a story even further so that someone's walking by an area, in this case, the milkweed to the right and the vegetative wetland buffer to the left, that different management regimes are taking place here. And the signs on these posts also indicate that, as well as the learning stations, which we'll get into in a moment. when we were looking at the base of the trail, one thing we didn't want to do was asphalt, and partly because the proximity to the wetland areas would make that prohibitive, but also because we were cognizant that in introducing elements that were oriented towards persons with limited mobility, we would have expected wheelchairs or scooters to be part of the trail experience, and sort of having asphalt would imply that at some point a motorized vehicle or bicycle would also find its use. We didn't necessarily aim to fully restrict those. We can't actually do that necessarily, but you can create the conditions by which the preferred methods of use are more or less apparent to the community. And the basis of the trail was just a very straightforward 5 foot wide stone dust base with a maximum of 8 to 10 degree inclines, depending on the area. Although we've managed to achieve, I believe, 10 degrees or less throughout the entirety of the trail, with some very slight modifications where we need to ramp up to a boardwalk or a structure, as well as the use of embedded granite stones between transitioning surfaces or indicating an object or an area of interest. And the real significant aspect here is we've been able to use the granite stones that were once steps to the buildings of the Belchertown State School. So there's a sort of a implicit embedding of history, or I wouldn't even say implicit, it's literally embedded history, where you are walking in the footsteps of those former students and members of the state school on this trail and on an equal basis with members who are experiencing the same thing as you are, but perhaps in a wheelchair. And the distance we found covered by this trail meant that we could really accomplish a long range objective, even if we didn't have the funding to do it, or we can make best use of the funding we did have and allow for expansion in the future. And as previously mentioned, the cable guide runs along the entirety of the trail surface, and it also integrates with the structures. And you can see in this photo, which indicates one of the main entrances, we've reworked the site so that upon entry, it's immediately accessible by wheelchairs. All of the grades make that apparent, especially along sight distance lines, so you can see where you're going, mostly to a good distance, and also that it's not prohibitive in terms of grade, and also the ability for users to congregate in specific areas or find resting points, which are located at regular intervals along the trail. And as I mentioned, the structures here integrate the cable guide as a way of creating additional stop points or experiential areas, depending on who's using it and why, and the ability for railings on the structures to allow for that same stability and also direction setting for someone who may be using it who is blind. We did have 2 great spots that we etched out for observation points. So you really got this like maximalist view of Lake Wallace itself, which is about a 45-acre combined wetland and open fishing pond, or older fishing pond, I should say. And in this instance, we found immediately the bird watchers showed up. They actually showed up well before construction was finished, unsurprisingly, but this really brings people up into the water, which was previously inaccessible, and draws them into this experiential process by which they've read the landscape on approach through the signs with the cable guide, with the learning stations, and they arrive at these destination points, really having understood or built a vision of what this place is, how it functions ecologically, and these great sweeping views, which make the sentimental value of the place very significant, but also the totality of the story of what Lake Wallace is also very apparent. And we did this in a second place with a large dock designed specifically to accommodate entire classrooms. This dock in particular is about 50 feet long, and it can have up to 40 students and teachers on it at once in comfortable spacing. So what we really wanted to push here is on the educational element as well. If someone comes with a group of students, or if RSI comes with a group of patients and members and they're all in wheelchairs or on their own mobility devices, they can all actually be on the water at once, and they can all see and experience that together. And in addition, each of these areas, as I'll mention in a moment, has different signs which detail even further the engagement and the complexity of the landscape. The last main detail of this trail project, which really is the result of a very notable and high profile proponent of the trail, Louise Levy at Belchertown Public Schools, is the integration of learning stations. And this was particularly important because what we saw is one of the main stakeholder groups using this project and using this trail would be students and teachers. And they needed not only to have a place where students can engage directly, biological or life sciences, in a landscape that represents that, but a reason to see experience outside the classroom as a benefit that is specific to Belchertown, but also creates a sense and scale of this opportunity for other schools in the area as well. And one of the ways we accomplished that was these individual signs that represented learning stations. There's 10 of them. They cover different themes of the landscape, ranging from woodland restoration to meadows. And each one individually has been tailored based on design principles for visual accessibility. These signs are not Braille specifically, mostly because making a 36-inch by 32 sign in Braille is extremely expensive. But what they do incorporate is different facets of high contrast visibility and textual arrangement, so that someone who may have slight impairment in visual would be able to read this, or would be able to have assistance in interpreting what the learning station says or is communicating. And in addition, each sign can represent a station for a group of students to direct a specific experimental activity or science class around, in which they can move this sort of grouping in the landscape. And depending on where they're standing or what their intents on experimentation are, they have different ways of reading this and building scientific interpretations of this place as well. And these 10 stations are located strategically. They're also built at a height ratio so that someone with a wheelchair can roll right up to and under them, read them with ease. And the cable guides to the opposite side denote to a user that these signs exist, and that when they stop in a place, it's just another layer of the story being told that they can interpret and experience the landscape by. On a final note, the biggest aim of this project was really exploring, again, beyond the sort of notional value of a trail and what a place changed through a trail or trail making does for supporting community well-being, landscape stewardship and regeneration, and setting sights on what's possible just from the trail alone, but also well beyond, and how the community can take ownership and agency over this. I want to thank everyone, in particular Becky, who worked with me to adjust some slides. Becky, I actually changed a few of them while we were all speaking, just so I can find a little bit more coherence and be a pretty fun time. But also thank you to everyone else, including the Recreational Trails Program, which has funded this project 3 times. And we have made sure that we use that money very wisely.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks everyone. And we went a little bit over, so I'm not sure if we have time for questions. We answered a few questions in the Q&A section. And I still can't share my video, but Amanda, did you want to close out or have anything else for folks? There we go.
No, I think that if people want to post their questions in the Q&A, Lauren or Jesse, do you have any other source of questions that you want to bring up?
Yes, I actually got one in the inbox. It's, is there a specific location that folks should head to meet for the Frost Moon hike this evening?
The Frost Moon hike. I would encourage that particular person to email Libby, not directly. It's elizabeth.knott@mass.gov. It's not a simple question to answer. So if they can reach out to us, if they want to attend that hike and haven't signed up yet, then that would be great.
And let me jump in. Knott has 2 T's, and it's Knott.
And also there are 3 Frost Moon hikes, one in Fitchburg, one in East Hampstead, and one at the Arboretum in Boston. So please specify which of the 3 you're interested in.
And I believe the East Hampton one may be full. I think you had to register.
Yep, that one did fill up.
Great. That was all the questions that we had in the inbox.
Great.
Great.
Okay, so I think we, you know, it's 4:15 at this point in time. Some people are heading out to their full moon hikes. And others, I hope we see throughout the course of the rest of the weekend. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.